the latest GPT models are better at differential diagnoses than people. And that was some recent research which was quoted by Ethan Mollick, the respected Wharton professor that I mentioned earlier. I can provide the source. So this is the way it's going. And when I spoke to my sister is a doctor, and I spoke to her and I said, we've got this amazing capability. Shall we put it into the field? Shall we let them go, let this kind of doctor loose in the field to treat patients? And her immediate reaction, which is quite justifiable, is no. You can't do that because it's too risky. We need to have a doctor oversight. We've spent years doing training. That we're not replaceable. You cannot do this. So we shifted our focus towards an area where there was no incumbent. Where are there no doctors? In the developing world, there is a shortage of doctors, which is extreme. So, for example, in Malawi, there is some regions where there is one doctor to 50,000 people, whereas the WHO recommends a ratio of 1 to 5,000. So that's a 10 times shortage at the least. And in Rwanda, we have similar kind of situations. So we started a program calling the clinics in these areas to see, are you interested in having a telehealth AI GP who can be your first level support, like first level IT support, where the people can call and say, my child has a fever and yellow eyes, and what is it going to be? And the AI can say, well, it's either a liver thing or a malaria thing. We probably should get yourself to a doctor. Or if it's a foreign body, like they've got something like a rice grain inserted into their nose, they can give some guidance on how to take it out. And that is the end of that particular call. And that satisfies the patient and frees up the doctor. And that happens a lot of the time. And then for those calls where you need a human intervention, you can either escalate by a phone call, by a transfer to a human, or you can put it on the schedule of calls to be followed up by the doctor later. But they can do this at the end of their shift at 10:30 p.m. or whatever time they're finishing their shift. And they can go through the list and see like green, green, green. Those are all fine. This one is, here's the orange one. I need to phone this person back. The red one, yes, we had the call of transfer to that area. So that's a kind of the one illustration. There are some other illustrations which I think were done by more industrial respected names, which include Klarna and JP Morgan. And I'm just going to bring those up quickly in a slide if I can find it. So Klarna and JP Morgan are two interesting examples because Klarna saved the work of 700 agents about a year ago, voice agents and text agents. And they improved the customer service because the resolution times and accuracy improved. And they projected, I don't know if this actually materialized, we have to take it with a pinch of salt. They projected a 40 million profit increase. And they also projected a halving of staff numbers because of AI. And I think those were projections, and we have to revisit them after the materialization. But even if it's a fraction of that, it's still a pretty compelling case. JP Morgan, not shown on this particular slide, but I heard from BCGX last month, has 10 ROCs projects, which are the big chunky AI implementations in the bank, each of which has $100 to $200 million investment. And we don't know what they are, but we presumably are dealing with like equity research analyst assistants, for example, or back office ticket processing assistants, or things like that. So I mean, the interesting thing is I think the capabilities of these models are increasing rapidly, and the current best crop of models, be they GPT-o1 Pro or o3 or Grok 3 or Claude 3.7, those are the current crop, but they'll be changing all the time. They are PhD level at most topics, which is an incredibly bold statement to make, but it's been backed up by some research. And they compared these models to PhDs, actual PhDs, and their actual answers within field and out of field, and these models are comparable. So suddenly we have all of this intelligence at our disposal across different fields, and how are we going to use it and deploy it in our organization is a really hard question. It's a question which begs being devolved into the organization, in my view, because it's too big for just the CIOs to dictate, here is the specific opportunity. We need to devolve the ability into the field. And one of the reasons that I say this is because it's hard to know what it's good at. I mean, I found some examples that it's good at, which I'll come to in a minute, but it's variable. And Ethan Mollick, with that name again, has called this the jagged frontier. So it's good in some things and it's bad in other things. And it's getting better in most things all the time. And keeping track of where it's good and where it's bad today and tomorrow and yesterday is actually quite difficult. It's a hugely voluminous task. So we need to devolve that experimentation down within the organization to allow people to experiment and find their own use cases, and also encourage and educate them on how to do this. Okay, so some more examples. Just personal ones, if I can inject that. The AI has recently been, in the last month, it's been my therapist. I had a debate at home about discipline. So it gave me some really sage, practical, useful advice. It's been my teacher. It helped my son educate him and me about lasers and their dynamics, which was his current discussion. We had a discussion over the voice-to-voice model of GPT, which was really interesting. Um, it's been my doctor. We had a sick child. How do we alleviate cold symptoms? But it could have been other things as well. It's remarkably conservative, by the way. It always tells you to go and see a professional, but you still get some pretty good advice out of it at the start of it. It's been my lawyer. I recently had a penalty charged against me from the tax man, and I wanted to find out what the counterpoints were and the likelihood of success and what approaches I should take. And please write the email to the tax man and did a really good job. So, in all of these things, it's really interesting because the effort is essentially free. It's too cheap to meter. And we're used to living in a world of scarcity of effort, where you've got an intern or like a junior that reports to you, or somebody who works in your team, and you can give them one assignment, and it takes them 3 days to come back. But with this, you can say, write me 20 different emails, and I did this. Actually, I did 3 different emails to be balanced. Write me 3 different emails for a difficult political intercompany situation, and I want you to analyze every person's perspective first, and their wishes and their needs and their outcome desires, and their limitations, and analyze the email and write a multi-part email for this. And it also did a better job than I could have done. And I learned a thing or two about, like writing these complex emails. So it was really useful in that respect. And these are just the naked use of the foundation models. They're expensive, at $200 a month for the most expensive model currently, but that's expensive in absolute terms. And when you recognize that this is actually leveraging the person and increasing your productivity at 10%, 20%, at some point 100%. That $200 is immaterial because it's doubling your value. And when it's doubling your value, now we're starting to talk about some meaningful return on the personal investment. So I would recommend, if you have more than one knowledge worker in your team, including you, pay the $200, learn an experiment, and you probably will get the payback very early on, as I got it in a day. So, these are the principles to identify opportunities: devolution, allowing other people to experiment in education within the organization, and not worrying about the cost too much. If their cost is a factor, put it on a line item on your budget, because it is going to grow and it needs to be monitored. And you might as well start tracking it from when it's low, because it is going to become a meaningful part of anybody's budget. And you might want to put it next to the human resource line on the budget, for reasons which are probably quite obvious. Because human resource needs are going to go down.
That's a hard statement there, Stephen, and probably connects with another part of the conversation here, is to go, it's great that the capabilities are building as fast as they are, and the applicability is ubiquitous in a business environment because of the emulation of human capability and the scale that you can apply and the rapidity of response from the solutions. But there's also still a lot of hesitation that comes from executives and others, with the Department of No right behind them going, what about the data? What about the protection of IP? What about our data leaving the bounds of the country, and that being a legislative issue, either GDPR or POPI here in South Africa as well? What about those issues? What about those factors in terms of looking at this and going, when is it a good idea? And what are the options to overcoming some of those barriers?
So don't underestimate human ingenuity as the principle that will guide us here, and the implication of that principle is that many of the services do have adequate data controls and on-prem, or at least within country data centers. So, for example, we were not allowed to let some of the data leave the UK for GDPR equivalent UK compliance reasons when working with healthcare provider ABC. So we signed business associate agreements, BAA, with OpenAI, and that enabled us to guarantee that they would have certain specific security in place, and geographic constraints on the data. So it wouldn't leave the UK. It would all be processed in UK data centers. That may not be enough. There are this is there is a staggering statistic that I heard a few weeks ago, which is that 30% of corporates are blocking GPT use for their employees on the internet, and that's essentially because of fear of leakage of information and improper use. And from anecdotal stories, I think that that's probably about right, because there are a lot of companies that are blocking this, especially the financial and healthcare institutions who don't want that private information to leak out. And the problem is people are going around it because they're picking up their mobiles, they're using their personal laptops to do their queries. And yes, there's an air gap, but there's still a risk of information leakage. So one of the solutions that we are quite excited about is model reason and model selection. So we've got this zoo of models. Some of them are the foundation models that we've been talking about, the OpenAIs and the Groks of the world. And some of them are the new arrivals, the open source models. And they're really good. They may be 6 months or 12 months behind the frontier models because they're often built with much lower budgets. But the algorithms are still really good. So DeepSeek is another example. It made the headlines 2 weeks ago. It was a fantastically high-performing reasoning model, DeepSeek R1, kind of on par with OpenAI's O1 model, a little bit behind, but free and open source, and you can download it and you can put it on your server in your building, and we did that. And it actually works really well. So my CTO, Michael, has this running for his own purpose, and he can route his queries to DeepSeek as opposed to routing the queries to OpenAI or Grok. And he has the same interface, and he just has a drop-down box which says which model do we want to select it to. Currently it's manual. It'll soon be automatic based on the parameters. And then he can route his queries internally, and he can monitor them, because we can send them off to a filter which flags in red, amber, green status which are the problematic queries, especially if they're going outside. And it saves costs because it can be run internally. And there are all of these benefits. And also, model routing is really helpful because sometimes you want a particular type of query to be a long, slow, expensive thought process, like the client pitch that I mentioned earlier. But sometimes you have 10,000 addresses and you want to run some arbitrary semantic function on them. Let's say, like, identify the addresses that are south of Tennessee, for example. And that needs some real understanding, but not a huge amount. So you can put a small model on it, like GPT-4o Mini, or one of the smaller DeepSeek quantized models, and it can click through these situations really quickly. So that's a nice way to kind of route the models. The other part of that tool, which if I can just mention, is that we've been saying that the models are not plugged in. They're kind of in a little box. They only know what you tell them in the query. And that is a huge limitation because it limits the input and limits the output. But that is being broken. They're breaking out of the box. So the first part is we need to fill in all the context, all the prompting, all the background to your question needs to go in. If you ask a model, write me a SWOT analysis on my company, it's going to fail unless you give it all the business plans. So that context needs to be filled in. And the big need that we've personally experienced is that the model needs access to all of your personal data when you're asking it a question. And I would be very happy if my model could read all of my emails, selectively the relevant ones, and all of my notes and all of my documents and all of my intranet that I have access to, and feed anything that's relevant semantically, not by keyword search, but semantically, meaningfully relevant, feed that into my queries. So we built that as a tool as well. And that tool it's currently being used by my CTO, Michael. I can't wait to get back to London to put it onto my computer because it's the one I've been wanting for a long time. That tool will allow us to ingest all of our local relevant knowledge. And I think this is meaningful because one of the biggest frictions on world GDP growth from a very high level perspective is information opacity within organizations. You don't know what your predecessor knew. You don't know what your colleagues knew. You sometimes don't even know what you knew. So, and for example, I have my Fireflies, which is taking my notes of all my meetings that I attend, and my AI is able to go back and look at all my Fireflies notes from the past and remember all the things that I've forgotten. So, that kind of information opacity is going to be a huge leap alone, let alone if you can feed that into an AI. So that's the other part of our model, which we built. So We gave our model a name. We called it RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. I'll come back to that, and model switch, and that's done locally. So local RAMs. Okay, so it's easy to remember because we've all heard of llamas, and now we have RAMs. And so coming back to RAG. So what is RAG? RAG is Retrieval Augmented Generation. That's when um, you retrieve specific documents from your corpus, be it your hard drive, your My Docs folder, your intranet, and you feed the relevant documents or snippets into the beginning of the query so that your model is well briefed when it answers your complex question. And sometimes the more briefing, the better. Like if you can give OpenAI O1 Pro Deep Research, if you can give it 100,000 word brief, that's like books worth of briefing. It can ingest that and use it in an intelligent way. It can pick the needles out of the haystack out of that. I mean, in legal discovery, it's amazing. You can imagine. And it can use that and synthesize that into a reasonable, into a good answer. So the problem is getting all that information in is really cumbersome, and it's a really big friction on the practical use case. So that's the input side. And then the other side, which I mentioned, which is liberating the model from the box, is we're on the cusp of that right now. And that's what's so exciting about the next few years. Computer use agents are arriving, and Microsoft has just released an open source one last week, by the way, which allows the AI to do whatever you're doing on the computer. So it can see your screen, and it can move your mouse, and it can type, and it can understand your screen. So so here's the example that I found frustrating. So last night I went for a run. I felt some pains in my chest, and I thought, okay, is this a stitch or is this a heart attack, which is happening now? Okay, which was a pretty strange question. Most people wouldn't even think about like that. They would just carry on with their run and say it's probably just a stitch. So I asked GPT while I was running along, can you tell me about pains in the chest? What are they indicative of? And it said it's mostly a stitch. And I said, all right, well, here's my background, here's my bio. And I said, you're probably fine. It's a very low risk. So I said, the follow-up question was, can you give me my statistical probability of a cardiac event in the next 10 years? And I know that there's a website which can do this, but it did not have the capacity to use a computer. So it didn't know how to go to the website and fill in all my personal details in the boxes and click the submit button until now. So now there are open source tools that can do this, that you can run on your computer, which will allow the model, the AI, to control your screen and effectively get that result for you. And then it would have been able to pick out my result, which said you have a 3.4% probability of a cardiac event in the next 10 years. So in summary, we're working on both the inputs and the outputs legs of these AI models, which will liberate them from the current constraints box that they have today. So I think the future is pretty exciting.
Which is also the cannibalization of past technology now with new capability, generalist capability within the AI toolset. So previously in the robotic process automation space, there were particular tool sets for things like optical character recognition and then processing documentation, but very much a recorded process, dumb process that an agent was executing in terms of move to X position on screen, click, enter text from structured tables, etc., and doing that. Now that's being revolutionized with the capabilities within both generative and regular AI sets of functionality. So that, and again, connecting with your exponential capability improvement, along with the ability to address certain of the risks, it certainly sounds like a convergence at the moment, Stephen, in terms of stuff that not only is it necessary for businesses to consider where they're going to do things with AI, but it's really essential, isn't it?
It is, because I think the productivity changes, and not just that, but the effectiveness changes are going to be tectonic over the next few years. And I've kind of started to sense this on a personal level, and we're starting to see the tools filter out. The future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed, goes the famous quote. If you leverage the future, especially in the regime of such fast growth in productivity and effectiveness that we're anticipating, you really will get a huge leg up on the competition in business. But it's not just in business. I mean, scientific research, prepare for a wave of deep tech innovations, because the PhD process and the research process is going to get a ×2 multiple. in the near future. We wrote a paper. Well, I wrote a paper with well, let me be honest. GPT wrote a paper. I just gave it the instruction recently. And I wanted to know how many lives would we save if we had full screening compliance in the top 4 cancers in the UK and the US. And it was a question that had been bugging me, and it wrote a 5-page academic piece, which was at the level of a good master's or a junior PhD student. And the answer is 48,500 lives is the number that it would save. So I mean, so there are so many opportunities. The question is like, how do we uncover them? How do we manage the jagged frontier? How do we liberate our people and our tools and our system from these previous brittle? You mentioned RPA. I agree. It's a great example, but it's brittle. It's not adaptable, and it's not usable by the end user nearly as much as these new processes are.